Greetings everybody, I'm obviously Jesus, and welcome to the true final video of 2017, just for you guys at the Enthusiast $6 tier. This is a ranking of all 19 episodes of Black Mirror from best to worst, with a little bit of talking about each one. We will, in inverse of the music video, we will go from the best to the worst, rather than from the worst to the best. Not that any of those music albums were bad. Music albums, that's what they are, music albums. But anyway, without further ado, my favorite episodes of Black Mirror, all the way down to my least favorite. Starting with San Junipero. Junipero? I don't know the correct inflection to give that, but it is just perfect. This is one of the most perfect episodes of TV I've ever seen. It is exactly what a Black Mirror episode should be, and it's all the more amazing that I can describe it this way, considering that it's far, far less bleak and far more hopeful and far more vibrant and colorful than a lot of the really great Black Mirror episodes that pioneered it and made it such a viral sensation, so to speak, in season 1. This is the pinnacle, not only of this series, but of, you know, an example of TV, you know, being at its peak, being just amazing. And I'm not going to spoil it. I don't want to. This is going to be, by the way, this is going to be spoiler heavy for some of these. The more I talk about them, there's probably going to be more spoilers. But some of them, the best ones, I will try to leave a little bit unspoiled, but I still do think that you should probably watch most of the series before you come back to this video and watch it and see if you agree with me. I will have a list completely spoiler-free in the description of this video and in the Patreon video little blurb box as well. So if you just want to, you know, watch them in whatever order you like and then come back and see if you agree, that's fine too. There will be probably some spoilers. But San Junipero, I don't want to spoil because it's just such a perfect episode of television. It is exactly what this series encapsulates, and it's the best of both the darker and the lighter side of this television show. To go very, very dark now, though, number 2 is 15 Million Merits. It's interesting because lately in the show, in White Christmas and in one of the most recent episodes, I think it's Black Museum, actually, this is referred to twice as a piece of media. So maybe not something that actually happened in the Black Mirror universe, but something that is a piece of media in the Black Mirror universe, or maybe it's just the show being fucking weird and toying with us and being meta. But this is the second episode of the first series, and is just the episode that really, really got me hooked on this show, and maybe it just kind of floored me and stopped me and just like held me in place because of how much it subverted my expectations and just how bleak it was, and how there wasn't really even any satisfaction in the ending. The ending not only left you with a big other question, it left you with this just impending sense of dread, and you very much identify with the inescapable nature of the main character's predicaments here, because I don't know, and it's interesting to note that, you know, Black Mirror, I think, while not the first TV show to do it, is a TV show that sort of pioneered or reinvigorated this type of television that now I think includes stuff like that Philip K. Dick adaptation, Electric Dreams. It's just, people who watch TV and watch these shows for these one-off episodes that don't necessarily have these conclusions. And I suppose this is something that has gone way, way back in film, but to take that and to, you know, mass market it as a TV show, which has a sort of a wider audience, or the implication is that it kind of has a wider audience and isn't just some weird arty thing, to take that kind of nihilistic thing and put it in, you know, a Netflix series, or at the time it was a BBC series, I think it really reinvigorated this sort of nihilistic, just big, ambiguous genre of speculative fiction or sci-fi. And this is just an episode of television that holds you in place and is just relentlessly undermining your hopes and your expectations for these characters, and does it so perfectly. Same can be said in a lot of ways for number 3 on this list, The Entire History of You, the first episode of the third episode of the first series. This was originally, I believe, written to be a film, actually, which sort of explains its sort of more bleak take on this idea of, you know, just a marriage crumbling apart because nobody can forget anything. And I mean, I want to stop just for a second and say that, this is a theme that Black Mirror covers a lot. Not just the general role of technology in our lives, but, what happens when technology is with us all the time, and how much that can degrade our quality of life without us realizing it. And Charlie Brooker, the writer and creator of Black Mirror, has talked a lot about how his overuse of Twitter in the past has caused him a lot of personal annoyance or distress or what have you. So, this is a big theme going through the show. And I will say that they do reuse themes a lot here. Any season of Black Mirror, I think, could potentially be a person's favorite series or gateway a person into loving this show as much as I do. I don't think it has to be the first season or the third season or the fourth season. I think the first and third have the best episodes overall, as you'll see from this list. But, this is, I think, still, as much as you can just dismiss it as, oh, this was the first series you watched, this was the first time they covered this theme in the show, of course you like it better. I do really think that this film script, which has ultimately turned into this episode, The Entire History of You, is just still one of the most affecting ways that they demonstrate just the degrading role of technology in people's lives. And you look at something like, more recently, like Black Museum, to get a little bit ahead of myself here, because Black Museum is pretty far down the list. You look at it, it treats this sort of invasion of technology into your life and into your head and undermining your life. It treats it sort of almost casually, where, Charlie Brooker, I don't know if he's consciously doing this, but at some point in these later series of Black Mirror, they're treating these concepts like the cookie concept, which in the universe of Black Mirror is a digitized consciousness. And they're treating this concept like there's someone who can see through your eyes. They treat it almost casually. So I do think that the heaviness is much more present in early series episodes like The Entire History of You, which is this amazing portrait of what happens to a marriage when you can't forget anything. And moving on to number 4 on the list, the first episode of Black Mirror that most people watched, the first episode of the first series, the National Anthem. Not only the name of a great Radiohead song, but probably one of the best gateways to get people into Black Mirror, because it is set in the current day. There's no real crazy technological elements that require some degree of suspension of disbelief for this to be good. It's just a weird look at how current day technologies, basically, or near future technologies, can undermine an entirety of a nation, and the sort of the strained relationship of this prime minister who is asked to fuck a pig on live television to save a British member, or a member of the British royal family. It's a strained relationship, this triumvirate relationship between him and his obligation to his role as a member of the British government, and his relationship to the public, all facilitated by different aspects of this technology. So, and the fact that they don't know where this member of the British royal family is. So it's sort of this weird speculative fiction that everybody, especially British people, can immediately identify with, and is really, I think it serves a double-tiered purpose, being not only people's gateway to the show, but also trying to be a really great episode and a really great tense episode of television in its own right, and I think it absolutely succeeds. Moving on, we have Nosedive. Nosedive is the first episode of the third series of Black Mirror, and it is what I would probably consider a very, very plain premise, elevated beyond its station, really simply by virtue of great acting, primarily by Bryce Dallas Howard from the Jurassic World movies, and also great writing. This is, I believe, the only time, except for The Entire History of You, which I believe was written as a script, like I said before, but apart from that, this is the only time where I believe Charlie Brooker has intentionally brought in other people to write with him, and in this case, he brought in Rashida Jones and Mike Schur from Parks and Recreation. And, I mean, they're in other things, and they've written other things, but that's what you probably know them from: Rashida Jones as an actor and Mike Schur as the writer from that show, or one of the principal writers from that show. And they really do elevate what is sort of a basic concept, which is the idea that what if it's Yelp for people? They take that premise, which sounds kind of boring when I say it out loud, especially in my board man voice, and they really do elevate it with, you know, a combination of great acting into one of the most enjoyable episodes of the series. Not for, you know, its weird, mind-bending, groundbreaking, you know, technological premises, but they turn it into something great despite all that, despite how it's not that far-fetched of a concept, and they really do just elevate this idea into one of the most enjoyable episodes, and I think it deserves a special nod to that ending scene. It has one of the best ending scenes of Black Mirror, of recent Black Mirror especially, because, you know, it's very hard to end something, especially when you only have like an hour or so to build it up, and you have to create this cohesive story, and people always judge endings very harshly because, you know, on some level they've watched an episode of this thing for like 50-60 minutes, and they have a pretty concrete idea in their heads in many cases, not always, but you know, some people can watch and be more objective, but a lot of people, myself included, oftentimes they have this idea of how this should end and how they would like it to end. And, you know, they designed one of the best endings because I wasn't expecting it at all. I wasn't expecting Bryce Dallas Howard's character to just laugh, just almost maniacally, but not with malice, but just with release at this other person that she's basically sharing a jail cell with. So that is a great unexpected ending to a pretty great episode as well. I think I didn't number them on my sheet here, but I think we're at number 6. Next one in the list by any measure is Metalhead. Metalhead is the 5th episode of this latest 4th series, the best of these latest 6 episodes in this 4th series, by my opinion, because it has basically zero explanation, basically no context. You'd never really get an idea of who the main character is, you know, trying to help. You get a little bit of a hint at the end as to what the kind of nature of it is, but we don't get any idea about anybody she's, you know, connected to or in contact with. We don't know why she's being hunted by these dogs, but all it does is, in this extremely beautiful, stylistic Black Mirror, you know, black and white, black and white cinematography style, it makes one of those fucking Boston Dynamic things into the goddamn Terminator. And that is just amazing. It's this little 4-legged robot that just hunts her across this beautiful, what I assume is a Northern England or a Scottish landscape. And it's just amazingly shot, just absolutely wonderful. Very little dialogue until just about the end and at the very beginning, and at one point in between when the main character is on walkie-talkie. But apart from that, it is this silent, pure horror experience, and it was just, it stands especially in contrast to Black Mirror's other attempt to do just pure horror. So it really is great, and we'll talk about that other example later. But Metalhead, great episode. Next we have White Bear, which for me was basically like just as bleak as 15 Million Merits, but in sort of a different kind of timey-wimey way. And it really did go almost just as hard to sell the cruelty of human beings that can be perpetuated by technology as 15 Million Merits did. It is extremely disorienting and confusing and light on information up until the very end, as far as I remember at the very least. It's been a while since I watched it, but this is just one of those episodes that goes for the jugular, and not quite as well as 15 Million Merits, but I still really do love it. I love it when Black Mirror just pulls out all the stops and shows how technology can be used to exacerbate existing human cruelties, and, you know, people will believably let it happen. Next, Be Right Back. Amazing performances from Donald Gleason and Haley Atwell. Donald Gleason you'll know as General Hux from the new Star Wars movies, and Haley Atwell from a bunch of stuff, including Marvel doing Agent Carter in the Captain America type related series things. Really, I wasn't going to put this as high as I did on this episode list, but then I really searched my memory and searched my feelings, to make another Star Wars reference, and I really thought that, you know, I mean, it's been a while since I've watched it, and I think I was really just with time discounting how much ache this gave me when I was initially watching it, and how much impact it had to see a person so desperate for their lost loved one that they would opt to have this sort of unfeeling android replace them and deal with the hardships and the lacking areas of that. So it's a really great exploration, not only of the idea that we could piece together a consciousness from what we put out there on social media, but it takes that technological premise and backs it up absolutely extremely heavily with just human experience and believable human reactions. Up until the ending, which I agree with most critics, I think it's a little bit, I don't know, wishy-washy and non-committal, but not the greatest ending, but still a really great story in Be Right Back. Now we'll get to the first episode of Series 4, USS Callister. This is basically a love letter to Star Trek. We have Jesse Plemons from Breaking Bad. We have Kristen Milioti from How I Met Your Mother. Basically, the premise here is there's this guy, and he takes all the coworkers he doesn't like, takes their saliva and their DNA, and creates digital clones of them who are real thinking, living beings, like the cookies from White Christmas and stuff, puts them in a spaceship simulator, and makes them all fear him and bow down to him as their captain. And he makes his arch rival, or his CEO, basically, who was once his friend and is now kind of a dick to him, act like this sort of waifish, wimpy guy, and he puts his feet on his back and whatnot. I mean, it's a pretty fun episode of the show, while also still delivering on that sinister technological element that Black Mirror has come to be known for. But like I did say when I talked about the connection to White Christmas and the cookies and the whole digital consciousness or people element, this is a theme that by now Black Mirror has explored a lot and will probably continue to explore. So it is kind of a tired theme, but the fact that they dress it up so well and really do sell the sort of campy fantasy of it being, this dude just likes to play. He's playing Star Trek, like he's doing Star Trek, but everybody else is forced to cosplay with him and fear him. Otherwise, he will just use the Force and turn people into hideous space monsters that he's got on his shelf in real life that are just little models. And so it's a very good episode in terms of it's extremely colorful. It's kind of a fun watch on account of the fact there's a heist to try to screw him over at the end. It is still, though, a familiar concept, and honestly I thought that Jesse Plemons' character, I think his name Robert, but I can't remember, it's some R name or something, but his motivations are somewhat unclear. I mean, you can sort of get the dynamic of him and Jimmy Simpson's character, definitely, and you would understand why he would want that. He would want to, torture an artificial AI clone of Jimmy Simpson's character here. But it's hard to. It's never really explained that whether or not he really is just putting people into infinite torture because some intern fucked up his sandwich. So it doesn't. At first, it doesn't really strike me that Jesse Plemons' character has, really solid motivations. There's also a lot of plot holes, like why this secret build is connected to the internet and is suddenly getting an update, which proves to be the MacGuffin that gets them out and saves everybody at the end, or why everybody at the end is just perfectly okay with basically being NPCs in fucking video games, getting shit-talked in random cameos by Aaron Paul. Or why Jesse Plemons' character suddenly becomes powerless at the end. At one point, he can use his hand to turn people into massive arachnids, but at the end, during the final chase scene, he has to basically abide by the same rules as everybody else. And it creates kind of this fun plot, but it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of this universe. It also doesn't make sense that Kristen Milioti's character can suddenly just press a few buttons on a keyboard and suddenly she's hacked something that nobody else can hack. And that proves to be part of the thing that starts to bring our villain down. So not entirely a well-drawn villain, a lot of cheeky plot holes. You kind of have to suspend your disbelief and suspend your desire to have a coherent technical universe. It is weird for Black Mirror to sort of just throw its technological consistency out of the window, I guess, but it does it in service of one of the more enjoyable episodes from season 4. This is my second favorite from the most recent series. So not a bad episode. It was a little bit wonky and inconsistent, I'd say. Next we have Hang the DJ. Hang the DJ is basically Black Mirror's attempt to recapture the magic of San Junipero, and mostly it fails. I mean, the characters are pretty likable. I wouldn't have expected either of these characters to be likable because I know the woman as that lady who was in Broadchurch for about 5 seconds, and the guy is the least interesting brother from Peaky Blinders who gets killed off in the first episode of this most recent series, which I'm somehow still watching even though the show has nothing to go for it except for really stylish cinematography. But anyway, you know, it still does work. They still do have a lot of character chemistry, but it's nowhere near the same level as the two characters from San Junipero. Those two characters have way more chemistry than the two in Hang the DJ. I don't really have a problem with any of the plot elements. It really is sort of like one of those hopeless romantic plot type deals where it makes you worry for these characters and then feel good when they're together. It definitely succeeds on a basic level, making this romantic subplot and this romantic struggle work. And then at the end, it basically does its job. Completely average in terms of everything from the chemistry between these characters to what the challenges they have to endure. It is kind of an interesting concept, like this idea that people would be part of a dating system that puts them together for a certain amount of hours or days or whatever, and they have to abide by that, especially otherwise their weird men step out from the shadows and tase you or something. And also it supposedly ultimately matches you with the perfect person. So it's an interesting concept. Played completely by the book, average, ends up being kind of an underwhelming thing because I don't know, it ends up being, they try to do the White Christmas thing where it was all in some digital thing trick, but it doesn't really work because it's hard to imagine something so sophisticated going on inside people's phones when they just wind up meeting in a fucking bar. I don't know. It just, at the end, it seemed like the episode, the gravity of it did not match the payoff at the end. And so, I mean, combine that with the fact that it really does seem to be like this San Junipero style thing where they're just trying to show these characters fighting to be together over an extended period of time. It does feel like a retread, does feel like a completely average episode. So yeah. Next we have Shut Up and Dance. Shut Up and Dance is a very confusing episode. It's kind of fast-paced, wants to keep you on your toes. Basically, these two guys are sort of fucked and being blackmailed into doing all these crazy things, basically to torture them. Ultimately, it is revealed that they were the bad guys all along. But it's great. I mean, I'm kind of making fun of it now, but it is a pretty fun ride. It has that same combination of bleakness to comedy and then back to bleakness for the end that I like when the series nails right, bolstered especially in the comedy department by Jerome Flynn, who you will know as Bronn from Game of Thrones. Pretty funny episode, nice balance, does keep you on your toes on that first watch. You can't, I mean, I don't think it's the hardest ending to guess, but it is maybe not the most obvious either. So it is pretty weird that it ends with Charlie Brooker thinking the troll face is still relevant, so that's kind of stupid, but pretty good episode, nothing wrong with it, keeps you on your toes, but yeah, I mean, it's entirely passable. It's entirely passable, just like Hang the DJ. Next we have Hated in the Nation, and this one for me is on this list where there is kind of a distinction. Everything above Hated in the Nation is pretty good, more or less. Everything below, I'd say, is pretty not good in some major way, going all the way down to pretty fucking bad. Hated in the Nation is unique among Black Mirror episodes because it doesn't even try to be clever. It doesn't try to be clever in any of the ways that any of these other episodes do. It doesn't try to be fun. It doesn't try to be, witty. It is just a basic thriller episode, completely, again, pretty passable, but it doesn't try to be witty or it doesn't do anything special that Black Mirror does usually. And even though it's pretty well acted, especially by Kelly MacDonald, not in any way, doesn't in any way leave you with anything to think about or any that was an interesting twist or that was good or what have you. It doesn't leave you with any of that, doesn't give you any lasting impression. It is there, it is passable, it does its job, and then it goes, and you're like, yep, okay, that was the plot, the end. Okay, so now while Hated in the Nation decides to be interesting but not clever. White Christmas tries to be clever in a lot of different fucking ways. It is also the first point at which I really noticed that Black Mirror was starting to really repeat itself, because this was basically the 7th episode of Black Mirror, because the first series were only 3 episodes each rather than 6. But Black Mirror really did start to repeat itself here. It took a lot of elements from the entire history of You and the time mechanics of White Bear, and basically that, no, this is happening over and over mechanic type deal that was going on White Bear. And they basically put it in an episode with really, really great performances, especially by John Hamm and Una Chaplin as basically this woman and this digitized version of herself. This is the first time where we see the named concept of the cookie, which is this digitized consciousness that is usually used to serve. We see that repeated in a lot of concepts. It basically becomes an in-universe thing, especially by the time Black Museum rolls around and stuff. This is basically supposedly a technology that is everywhere and ubiquitous and all that stuff. But this is where we see that concept for the first time. But this is like an episode. I believe it divides itself into 3 parts, but it's more like 5 parts. You have the individual tragedies of John Hamm's character and the other gentleman's character, whose name I can't remember right now, who's supposedly in this digital cabin. Spoiler alert. But it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of technological elements. It's a lot of stuff. And much like Black Museum, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it doesn't always come to the most cohesive end. Black Museum is, far and away worse than this episode in terms of how splintered it is. But White Christmas is still trying to do a lot with, I looked it up, it's actually a 74-minute episode. It felt so long to me just by virtue of how overstuffed it is and how many different angles they're trying to play with all these different technological limitations and aspects and trickeries, that I really think it would have been better if it just focused itself down and really just focused on 1 or 2 of these things rather than breaking it up into 3 acts, all these different stories, different backstories, different reveals and twist endings, and different aspects of the twist ending, I should say. But White Christmas does it decently. It juggles a lot of balls, so to speak, in its mouth. It isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's still a pretty good episode, but this is where Black Mirror A starts to repeat itself and B starts to overstuff itself and just runs out of time to do stuff with what it has. Next we'll move on to Men Against Fire. This commits the sin of, one of the major sins you can commit in the Black Mirror universe, which just is being really, really obvious. Oh, digital goggles that make the enemies appear even less human. They're literally dehumanizing them. How clever. And then the guy from Stamper from House of Cards shows it up and says that to you, basically, and then they try to repeat the ending from 15 Million Merits. Not so great, although I'm sort of reducing it. I'm being reductionist about it. In the moment to moment, it is actually not that bad of an episode. It kind of keeps you invested up until that reveal, and then you're just like, oh, yep, this is happening, and then and that's the episode. So it's kind of obvious, not really what you want or what you really go looking for in a Black Mirror episode. Moving on to another pretty obvious episode, we have Crocodile from Series 4. This is basically, I look at it as something analogous to Shut Up and Dance, just from a different angle, where instead of the true motive and the true reason for these things happening being concealed like they are in Shut Up and Dance, you can just, this is basically just a tale of a person doing bad shit to cover up the bad shit they already did. And it is sort of somewhat unbelievable, because the whole reason that this woman, who is the protagonist of this episode, starts doing bad shit is to cover up something that I don't think legally is even at fault for at the very beginning. I mean, she does help to hide a body, but I mean, she wasn't driving the car that killed the guy, so I mean, it couldn't be that severe of a punishment. So we also don't get that much of her as a character. She just immediately shows up. She's a drug addict, or not a drug addict, but she's like doing a bunch of drugs in a club and dancing, and then she's an architect, and then she is just a fucking murderer. We don't get really that much insight into who she is. We don't get much characterization out of her. We just see this relentless pursuit, or not this pursuit, but we just see this relentless series of events of bad shit happening, just like we do in Shut Up and Dance. But unlike Shut Up and Dance, we understand completely why she's doing this. And it's just, we have to just sit there and glue our eyes to it and watch it as it's happening. And it's very tense. It's very, the woman, the Muslim woman who, I don't know if she's Muslim, actually that's kind of racist of me to assume, but the Middle Eastern woman at least, who gets killed like 2/3 of the way through the episode, basically she is, she makes it really, really convincing when she's tied up and she knows she's basically going to die. So that it's pretty harrowing. I will absolutely say that it is pretty harrowing, but it's not, again, surprising. It's not obvious in the way that Men Against Fire is, where it was trying to conceal something from you, and then it kind of just, it was trying to pull a fast one on you, and then you see the trick, and it's like, oh yeah. But Crocodile is basically an episode that you know what's going to happen. It's extremely predictable. It's harrowing to watch. But the twist at the end, where she killed a blind baby, where instead she should have just killed a guinea pig in the corner, and gets undone and hoisted by her own petard, like the kid in Shut Up and Dance. It feels more forced. It feels like it's a very play it straight episode, and then it flips you on your head and it's uncharacteristic of that episode. But anyway, again, not terrible, but yeah. Black Museum. Black Museum is an anthology within an anthology. Has 3 distinct stories in here. The guy who plays the proprietor of the Black Museum, Rollo Haynes, is played by an English actor who does not only a very good American accent, but he plays his sort of sadistic nature. He plays it really well. Like I really wish we had gotten this performance out of him in a different context. Because honestly, I mean, this episode is sort of weird because it starts off so referential, so self-referential. There's all these quote-unquote Easter eggs, but they're so fucking obvious, more obvious than any Easter egg on anything I've ever seen. They have the box, the cloning box from USS Callister. They have one of the bees from Hated in the Nation. It starts off so self-referential and so obviously self-referential that I thought it was literally going to be even more meta than it was. I mean, it is pretty meta because Rollo is, at least at the beginning, a stand-in for Charlie Brooker, who is basically presenting this museum, this anthology, this collection of weird, sadistic shit with no happy ending. So he starts off as this kind of cipher for Charlie Brooker, the writer of the show. So that's good. And then the first story, which was actually, I believe, written by Penn Jillette and adapted into this sort of anthology, is pretty good and kind of gory and interesting, but then it just drops off. And the technology from that doesn't even really become relevant in the later episode. It's the technology from the second and third stories that become relevant towards the end result of this episode. So it's very, very jumbled, does not know what it wants to be. It doesn't know if Rollo Haynes is a stand-in for Charlie Brooker or if he's just a very shittily written villain. Because, I mean, he's the guy who, for no real reason other than money, tortures this poor, wrongly convicted black guy and makes a museum where you can come, pull a lever and electrocute his hologram, his cookie, his virtual self in an electric chair. Why is this character doing double duty as someone who, we're supposed to maybe be adversarial to as a stand-in for Charlie Brooker, but why does he then become somebody who is just completely morally void and we're supposed to completely hate and not have any sort of nuanced feeling about? It's sort of weird. And I thought, because of all the obvious references to previous Black Mirror episodes, I thought they were honestly going to go a way different direction and make it more about, creating a centralized universe and tying the universe of Black Mirror together or something. But no, it really is quite a schizophrenic episode of the show, or has multiple, or dissociative personality disorder as far as the TV episode is concerned, because it does not know what it wants to be. The first story, like I said, is good, probably could have anchored its own episode, but doesn't really amount to anything. Not enough time is given to it. It's kind of just a waste of a good idea. The second story is way too long, and it serves only to set up the technology that is used in the third and final story at the conclusion. And the third, by the time that you see by the time the curtain is pulled back, so to speak, and you see the gentleman who is in the electric chair being electrocuted constantly, and we learn his backstory, we know Rollo is evil. We know that something is afoot. We know that this is the story that's going to get resolved. We know what's going to happen. And Everything else is just like saying, oh, it was that all along. It was that all along. The technology from that second story, her mother was in her head all along. I don't know. It just seems really forced, and it diddles around until a really obvious third act, and I don't think it's a very good episode. But it is not as bad as Arkangel. Arkangel is not an episode I expected to hate, or really not hate, but not an episode I expected to be this ambivalent about, at the very least, because not only is it directed by Jodie Foster, you know, well, I guess that is probably why I went into it. I don't think there's any other reason, because, you know, you would think Jodie Foster would attach herself and do a pretty good job of directing, you know, something that is somewhat close to hot garbage, but it really, really is predictable beyond belief. It's like, who knew that controlling your child and being able to see everything she sees and selectively censor her environment, who would ever imagine that might come to some form of rebellion that might include a violent outburst? And so it's really predictable. The big climax is this girl who's supposedly, you know, snapping and smashing her mother's face in with this tablet that's been used to control her, and it's symbolically pretty effective. And again, the tablet is it turns up in Black Museum, of course, but you know, controlling parenting leading to rebellion is not a wild concept. It's really just the technology is ancillary to the plot. Controlling parenting, rebellion. It's like, I mean, I guess the idea here was to make the violence so palatable or so unpalatable rather, that we recoil and are like, oh shit, this is deep. But no, it's tame violence. It's really predictable. Not a good example of the writing on this show. Now we come to the final two episodes. Here we have Playtest. This was the other attempt of Black Mirror to basically go full horror that I mentioned when I was talking about Metalhead. It is not very successful. It is not visually horrifying. It is not interesting. The characters are not likable. The twists are fucking stupid, especially the one at the end where it's about calling his mother because somebody told him to call his mother. It's it's just so bad. And then we have the Waldo Moment, the last episode of Series 2, and the last episode I'll talk about here in this video. I'm probably going to be too lazy to just edit the poop emoji over my face, but yeah, that's what it is. It's poop. But yeah, I'm obviously just, that was Black Mirror. Let me know what you think in the comments. YOLO. Happy fucking New Year.